Last week, we spoke more of how we can work on our cognitive and bring it into our behavior. Tonight's lesson is taking this to the next step, one step further. And this is how we're going to try to progress more and more. Last week, we spoke about the difference between two Hebrew words. One was hisbonenut and one was hisbodedut. Hisbodedut was where a person would seclude themselves and leave the materialistic world as much as possible. And the more they would strip themselves from the mundane and the physical world, they would be able to connect with something spiritual. This week, we're going to focus more on the hisbonenut, which was the meditation, which we began speaking about last night, how a person would contemplate on an idea, and through contemplating on the idea within the physical realm, we would draw it down and bring it down into our day-to-day life. Today, we want to see how through contemplating on these concepts, and we'll give more concepts, we can not only bring this into our day-to-day life, but we will actually change the way we see the world. And this is something so beautiful. We'll realize how we see the world from the eyes that we choose to see the world from. When we see negativity, we don't know if it's true negativity. Perhaps it's just the way I'm seeing it from my viewpoint. Maybe a blessing is a curse. Maybe just from my viewpoint, it's a blessing. So we're going to go through this and try to figure out how to live a different type of life. So if you have your student book, open up to page 80, where you will see here how Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe tells us, based on the ideas that we spoke last week, that hisbonenut is a concept of building blocks. And we have this here on the screen to help you kind of reframe this. So the word hisbonenut means contemplative meditation. That's how we translate the word. We take the source, the root of the word bonenut. What does it mean? The root is bina, bet yud nun he. Bina means contemplation. Right? We have the three cognitive ideas we spoke about in the first class: chachma, which was wisdom; bina is contemplation; and das is the understanding. So contemplation is when you have that idea, until you understand it, you're contemplating and you're thinking about it. That is usually the longest stretch of your ideas are in the place of contemplation. Why during this moment, right? In other words, chachma, the moment of wisdom, is where the idea popped into your head. It could be an instant chachma, it could be an hour, it could be a moment, but it's there. Contemplation is building on that idea that you got. Das is when it's implemented, right? So implementing it could also be a short time, doesn't have to take a long time. But contemplating on the idea is the longest. Why? So what Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe is saying in text 1 is because bina can also be translated as binyan, as you see on the screen. When you contemplate an idea, you're building this idea, and building something takes time. And the beauty of building something, and this is what he writes, we'll read it inside. The Hebrew word hisbonenut, contemplative meditation, seems etymologically from two root words, binyan, building, and bina, contemplation. When we practice cognitive meditation, we build ourselves as a result of gaining a more profound understanding of our environment. So hisbonenut, this idea of contemplation, is a fundamental concept in Judaism, and it's something that we're expected to do on a regular basis. We spoke about this last week, how the Arizal says that a person should do it at a minimum weekly, and if he's a person who doesn't have the cognitive ability, then he should do it once a month. But at least once a month, at a minimum, we have to do this. The reason why we must do it is because through contemplating this idea, we're going to build ourselves to be a different type of person. And this can work, God forbid, in the negative as well. When we contemplate on ideas that are not good ideas, that are, poisonous to our mind, For example, if we waste too much time on areas that we're not familiar with, medical areas, if it's COVID, if it's political areas when we're not politicians, if it's scientific ideas when we're not scientists, in different businesses where we don't belong, then we're essentially wasting our time because we're contemplating ideas in the wrong location. Tonight we're going to come in, our goal tonight is to bring out these ideas in the most positive way possible. Good evening, Kreindl. So nice to see you. Good evening, Kreindl. Nice to see you. You look great. You're muted, so we can't hear you. I'm sure you're giving us good wishes.
Okay, I just found the code for the class in Onoka.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry.
here you are. Okay, we're happy you're on. So we're in the student book on page 2. So you can open, page 82, text 2, page 82. So what are we talking about tonight about contemplating which ideas are we trying to build? So we're going to build on the ideas we already started talking about last week and bring it to a whole new level. Last week, we discussed the concept of a flame and a candle, how a flame always is yearning to go upwards, and the candle keeps it rooted down. Same as the soul within our bodies, that our soul that's in our body always wants to go to do something spiritual, wants to leave the body because the body is mundane, is materialistic. It's not looking for that. It's looking for something spiritual. The body is the opposite. The body is looking for mundane, materialistic, and really doesn't care about the soul. But the reality is, we all know, we're smart people, that without the soul, the body is worth nothing. Not only that, we know that our soul, even though when you say, in my heart, we point to our soul is in our heart, but we all know our heart and our soul really manifests itself in every single limb of our body. If our soul is not on our fingers, God forbid, our fingers they'll be dead. They won't be alive. They won't have any feeling, touch, or movement. Any part of our body that is lacking that soul, that flame, then it just won't work, right? So the same idea we're going to bring into the world relationship between God and the world. God is the soul, God is the spirituality, and the world is the materialistic, the mundane, the physical world. The physical world, without God infusing his energy into the world will just cease to exist. There won't be any life in this world, right? So this is the concept. We're going to be talking about this in the beginning of the class. Another way of kind of understanding this concept is we have on every block, there's an electrical grid, and the grid divides its electricity to each home. And every home has a wire that comes into their house that gives a certain amount of electricity to that home. That home divides that wire into many different outlets, into your refrigerator, your air conditioner, your heater, your lights, your washing machine. Everything is plugged into this electricity. Every product, every electrical product you have is consuming a different amount of electricity. Your refrigerator consumes a certain amount of electricity, your cell phone, another amount. Somehow, the right amount of electricity comes into the right device at the right time. This is how electricity is designed, and through these amazing engineers, they figured out how to do this precisely and to perfection, and it's amazing. But this is a way for us to understand how this great God, who is so godly, is not just stuck in heaven somewhere, where some people may think God is so great that he's up there in heaven, and he's not down here in this world. And God kind of just let this world go in neutral and just let it roll down the mountain, and we're just slowly rolling, and we might disappear, might go, who knows what. Rather, the Jewish way of understanding is that God is very active in every moment of this world's creation. God is continuing to create the world every single day, every single moment, every single millisecond. Not only that, but God is actually interested in every single one of us and our behavior, our decisions, the things that we do. Not only that, this goes further. God is concerned about every animal's needs. God is concerned about the plants, the sea, the fish, and even the stone mountains. So God is really concerned about every single detail in this world. Tonight, what I would like to do is present to you some sources where this is not my ideas, but these are ideas from our greatest sages who's learned this from sages that were greater than them, from one generation to the next, all the way back to the days when the Jewish people were in the desert, when Moses learned directly from God all of these concepts. So these are concepts that are sourced in something that we call emes, the truth, nothing but the truth. And this is as fundamental as we can get. And we're going to bring the ideas, the sources, contemplate, meditate for a few minutes, then keep going a little deeper and a little deeper. So let's begin the journey. We're on page 82, text number 2. Michael, do you want to read for us?
Okay.
Thank you.
The spiritual force that animates creation is a manifestation of God's presence. Every detail within creation is an expression of God. Therefore, God is constantly present within our lives and within the world. Meditating on God's presence opens an awareness to a deeper dimension of reality, which leads in turn to a sense of wonder and joy. It also provides the comforting sense that results from being aware of God's closeness to us. Continue.
Yeah.
From the soul of the universe, King David exclaimed, "My soul has blessed God." Why did he feel the need to emphasize that it was his soul that praised God? He told himself, just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the universe. So King David concluded, let the soul, which possesses the same qualities as God, praise him.
So this is King David's brilliance right here, right? He's saying, let my soul praise God. This is an amazing idea. Look at the screen here for a moment. God's presence is manifested in the world, right? Okay, this is more of a simpler idea. But if we believe that, then we should also believe that God's spirit, God's presence fills the world and is present in every single detail, right? Because if God's manifest in the world, if God is the soul for the world, the same way my soul is for my body, and if my soul left my body, then my body would just lay flat and have no movement and no life or anything to it. So too, if God's presence would leave this world, the world would just cease to exist. So it must be that God is present in every single detail of the world. So what King David is teaching us is how to be conscious that our soul is, the relationship from our soul to our body is a very similar relationship to God and this world. Okay, so here we're bringing, yes.
Abraham said the same thing when he first started. He said there has to be someone who created everything. King David reiterated it in his own words.
That's right. That's right. And taking this a little bit further, we also see how God is in the details of everything in this world, every single movement that we make. The idea that we're all here sitting in different places, but chose to do this is because that there is a soul that decides this for us.
Can I say something, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you feel that God is in everything, then what you had said about without the soul, the rest of us is, essentially nothing. That can't be true. Without a soul, the rest of the world is still beautiful and full of God. You don't
Correct.
need the soul. There does not need to be a soul to have the presence of God.
But the presence of the soul makes us appreciate God.
Okay,
Well-
but without the soul, God
When you
is
say
there.
soul, what are you referring to?
Whatever we're referring to soul as.
So there's a soul that's in the body. The soul animates the body. When a person dies, what happens is the soul leaves the body.
Yes.
So we're trying to compare that experience, the soul experience, to a body, that relationship between the divine energy that animates the physical world. So if one person dies, the world doesn't die, correct? But if one person's soul leaves their body dies.
The soul is, to me, is like,
Yeah, our world today, the way we have it, there is a divine energy that manifests itself in every detail of the world. Whether we recognize it or not, it's there. The question is if we're going to choose to see it or not. So tonight's class is really trying to show us that we have the potential to see the divine energy that's within every single physical object that we have with us.
soul's a connection to God. That's period.
Right. Does that help, Jeffrey?
Well, yeah, it's helpful, but all I'm saying is at the beginning here, we were talking about the fact that without a soul, there is no, I don't know if the word was used, meaning, or there is no, I don't know. I don't remember the text we said a little while ago, but
Without a divine force, nothing could exist.
that's it right there. So,
Which means that there is a divine force because it exists,
yeah, whether we have a soul or not.
whether we're aware of it or not. Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
In other words, according to the Torah's understanding, there must be a soul. Whether we understand it or not, whether we believe it or not, whether we can relate to it, whether we're conscious about it, that is not significant. But the Torah says that this is the reality. This is the way it is.
But what I'm saying is our access to the divine force is through a soul. That's
Our
how we,
access, no.
that's
No,
how
so
we
let's-
access it.
So let's clarify. We access the divine force through any mitzvah that we do, through putting on tefillin, through Shabbat candles, through eating kosher, through doing a kind deed to another person. That's how we connect to the divine force. That's the telephone number to make the contact, to reach something divine. But the divine is always there.
Yes.
The divine is always there.
Let me
So-
try to make it.
Say the example, hold on. Say the example of, we used before, of electricity. So the electricity is in the wire, it's in the outlet, but there's no electricity coming through the outlet, but it's there. But once you plug something in, the electricity begins to come through, right? So in electricity, we know, you just plug in the male and the female and the electricity runs. How do we physical people connect with something spiritual? That's a question that we have to get answered. But there is spirituality there. There is godliness there.
What I think he's trying to say, or what I'm getting at is when we get started, when we start life, before we started, God said, breathed life through the nostrils.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Moshe, I think in the next text it actually says that. So let's look at text 3 on page 83. Okay. Let's look here. Marilyn, you want to read first? Exposing the divine. see where it says a highly detailed self-awareness.
You're not going to hear me if I don't
If you're
unmute.
muted.
A highly detailed self-awareness of the manner in which our soul operates within our body will allow us to appreciate that the divine is manifest within every detail of the universe, and that each detail exists and is sustained through divine energy. This parallel is expressed in the teaching: just as the soul fills the body, so does God fill the world, and is expressed in the verse, from my flesh I can perceive the divine. Every sensation and experience of the body, even the most insignificant, is an active expression of the soul. Similarly, even the smallest detail or phenomenon within the universe is actively directed by God. When we develop this awareness, we sense not only the divine providence in everything, but we see divinity clearly wherever we turn. We can literally see the divine exposed.
Beautiful. So this is the previous Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, describing here a simple concept. When we move a finger, it doesn't seem like a very significant thing, but we can only do it if we have a soul in our body, which means if we're alive. If we're not alive, then we can't move our finger, even though our finger is just such a simple thing. It's almost like it's no big deal. So I think the same thing is with our relationship with God. We don't have, it doesn't have to be the height of Yom Kippur at the moment of Ne'ilah for us to have a relationship with something spiritual, with something godly. We can have, it says that it's unstable, sorry. We can have a simple moment of mundane, of shopping in the grocery store, and that moment can be a spiritual moment. We're just recognizing that we're alive. The world is alive. The sun is out. God's alive. That's a godly experience right there. So let's look at the screen. The previous Rabbi is bringing out here that not only to notice how everything comes from God. So there's one concept to just believe that everything that we have in this world comes from God, right? That's the first level of faith. But the deeper level of faith, what he's trying to bring out here, is to feel how every single item, every object, every action that happens in this world is actually a godly expression. So when you spill a cup of water, you say, thank you, Hashem. Thank you for spilling my water. When someone does a favor for you, you realize that's an expression of God. When something good or bad, when anything happens, we recognize that that action that just happened is indeed an expression of God. The more we teach ourselves to recognize that every movement of this world is similar to every movement of my body, the same way it's the energy that's within my body gives me the ability to move my hands and my legs. We're not talking about the deeper concepts where how our digestive system works or how our cognitive and emotional system works. We're talking about just simple movements, right? Simple movements. It can only be done through being alive. In other words, through having a soul in our body, in every detail of our body. And every movement is an expression that you're alive, right? When you see a person walking, hey, that's an expression that you're alive. When you see someone talking, it's an expression you're alive. When you see someone daydreaming, it's an expression that they're alive, right? In other words, when you see a random person on the street and you say, I want to know if you're alive or not, just seeing them, you know that they're alive. So the Rebbe is saying exactly the same idea is with the world. every time you see anything in the world, anything, any physical objects, food, plants, trees, birds, anything you see, when you see it, you say, oh, this is an expression that God's alive. This is an expression that God manifests itself in every detail of this world. Right? Very interesting idea. This is an idea. The more we contemplate on this, like we mentioned earlier, we'll start building the binyan, we'll start building this, that we'll actually start seeing things. And when we see the things, we'll start seeing, wow, you're alive, right? Instead of waiting for a person to come over and tell you the best news, otherwise it's a disappointment. Now, when you just see someone walking, doing something very simple, you'll realize it's an expression that God is alive. Very interesting idea. Let's continue the same idea where the Rebbe continues this idea in text number 4. Crandall, you want to read for us? You able to unmute? Text 4, page 85. Oh, it's a little bit of a long one. You got to unmute for us to hear you. Carolyn, you got to unmute. Unmute. Start again. There you go. Now we hear you.
I stopped the video, but that's okay. The entirety of creation divides into 4 kingdoms: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Each of these is subdivided into myriads of specific species. If we examine the world of plants, for example, we encounter a broad spectrum of vegetation, such as trees, crops, vegetables, grass, and herbs, each category of which is further divided into multiple species. There is an astonishing variety of trees, and each kind is unique and distinguished from all other trees. There is a tremendous diversity of plants and herbs, and again, each kind offers a unique nutritional value. Some are beneficial, while others are poisonous, and they each carry a unique design and set of properties. Furthermore, within each of these subspecies, there are countless individual units, each of which is similarly unique. Now, each individual unit possesses a unique life force, divine energy, that is tailored for it. That life force is what we call its soul, the spiritual entity that animates it, causes it to grow, and guides everything that happens to it from the moment it sprouts from the earth until its last moment when it is plucked. Even the plant's final fate is within the jurisdiction of a specific divine providence that determines whether the plant will be harvested for an overt purpose, such as animal fodder, trampled underfoot in an apparently aimless manner, or wither in due course and disintegrate entirely. Such a matter is the result of a specific decision and calculation of divine providence. Everything in this world has a unique divine energy that is its life and guide. Each blade of grass is unique. It may appear identical to another blade, but closer examination reveals specific features that set a specific blade apart from every other blade of grass in the universe. This distinction is the result of the specific divine energy that God invests into this blade. It is an entirely individualized divine manifestation.
Thank you. So the Baal Shem Tov and all the Hasidic masters went on to teach how the world is not just ran by a godly energy, but God actually manifests every single detail to the extent of a blade of grass. You see in text 5, it says, from a quote from the Medrash, Amar Rabbi Simon said, each blade of grass has a spiritual force that strikes it and tells it to grow. And not even a blade of grass or a leaf that grows is done on its own, but everything has to go through the will of God and get the godly energy. And this is the uniqueness of this world, that God created so many different species and characteristics, and everything has a lifespan. Some for one season, some for a few years, some for many years, some for hundreds of years. But God determined exactly how this should be. And for most of these, it was predetermined, except human beings have free choice. So we don't have that predetermined. Our actions judge how it will be. But for the rest of vegetation and for the animals, this has all been predetermined by God. This is taking the concept of contemplation, of a general idea that we can simply understand, how God kind of put all of us together to be on the same class. Interesting how this all happened. But we can understand how God orchestrated this to be. But the more we contemplate on details, and this is what the Rebbe is writing here, the more you go to details, you'll start seeing that every person actually has a different story and a different journey of how we got here. And the chances of us actually ending up here are close to none. But it happened. This is the truth. We're all here. So he's saying, even if you look at a flower, from far you say, yeah, they all look the same. I remember in the summer we went to a flower garden. What's it called? The tall stems with the yellow sunflowers.
Botanical garden.
We, not this year. This year we went to a sunflower garden for the first time. It was gorgeous, gorgeous. From far, all you see is a sea of yellow. As you get closer, all of a sudden you realize there's some rotten ones, there's some good ones, some are taller, some are shorter. My kids wanted to pose in front of specific stems because those look different or better, whatever, right? The point is that when you see something from a distance, you see everything as one. Everything is unified. The more detailed you look into it, the more you realize that even on the same stem, not every leaf is the same texture, the same shape, the same lines on it, and so on and so forth. And he wants to bring this as a way to help us understand that the energy that God manifests into every single detail is also very unique for that item. And just like no two humans are the same, no two animals are the same, no two plants are the same. And this concept is a concept that can truly be meditated on and contemplated on for many, many hours to really get a really good idea on this. The idea that the Rebbe teaches a lot, the previous Rebbe that we're quoting here, is that imagine your whole life, you got to see everything in black and white. Black and white, imagine black and white television. Some of you might remember that. Life in black and white, in the world of black and white. All of a sudden, they brought colored television, and it's a whole nother story. Now already they're bringing 3D television. I mean, the story is a different story, right? If there's someone, God forbid, that was only able to see black and white, and you give him a new pair of glasses, and these glasses are glasses he can see color. All of a sudden, he sees the world from a whole different viewpoint. But did anything change in the reality? Nothing changed. The only thing that changed was his perspective and how he's seeing it, right? Okay, not literally because the way his eyes are digesting the colors, etc. But for the analogy purposes, the only thing that changed was the way he began to see the world. And this is the idea of understanding that there's a spiritual energy. There's something divine that manifests itself into every detail thing in this world. To help us understand this, we have text number 6. Jonathan, you want to read for us? Text 6?
Yes.
The symphony.
Symphony? The
Page
Cosmic Symphony.
87. Yeah.
Cosmic Symphony. The following parable I heard from my master, my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov of blessed memory. There was once a talented musician that played beautiful, sweet music. All who heard it were mesmerized by the sweet, pleasurable, blissful sounds. They could not hold themselves back from dancing to the rafters in sheer ecstasy. The closer the people drew to the source of music, the more entranced they became and the more ecstatic their dancing. Just then, a deaf individual came across the scene. Not noticing the musician, he simply observed people dancing wildly and regarded them as crazy. What on earth could make people so ridiculously joyful all of a sudden? He muttered to himself, now, if he were intelligent, wise, and knowledgeable, he would deduce that they must be dancing to a delightful melody. In fact, contemplating the depth of pleasure they must be experiencing, judging by their response, he would be moved to join them in delightful dance. The analogy is obvious.
There you go. So this is an analogy to help us understand the great depth of the story, right? And if we were able to appreciate, now I'm not saying that we could truly appreciate the power of God and the amount of divine energy that manifests itself in this world, but if we were able to just understand a little bit of it, we'd be so much happier and freer people. Right? We wouldn't be as critical, or we would be more accepting, and so on. Now, how are we able to become this? How are we able to have a good ear for music? How can we be more sensitive to this divine energy that we're talking about here? So generally, we've been saying that through meditating on God's presence, we will feel his closeness. When you want to feel close to a fellow person, so you want to either talk to them, you want to see them, you want to really feel close, you want to embrace them, you want to hug them, you want to hold their hands, you want to touch them, right? Even if for whatever reason you can't see the person, if the person is not well and they're lying on a bed and they're covered, and you're only able to hold their hand, by just holding their hand and touching their fingers, you feel that softness, you feel that love, you feel that connection, you feel that the individual is alive by just touching their hands and their fingers. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being in a hospital with a loved one who was sick and they're not able to move. And by just feeling their hands and their fingers, you have this certain feeling of like, I'm connected with the person and I don't want to leave the person, and the person's still alive. And there's this energy that just goes through touch. How can we have this feeling and this closeness and this relationship to this divine energy, to godliness that is here? This, the Baal Shem Tov is telling us that when we meditate on these ideas, when we meditate on the idea of learning the music, learn these ideas that this everything that happens is orchestrated by God, we will start feeling this as well. We would start actually feeling it. Let's read text 7. Elisha, are you up to reading?
Not actually, because I'm coughing.
Okay. So then
Sorry
Michael
about
will read for you.
Mike,
Michael there?
he just stepped away for 2 seconds.
Okay, so we're talking about meditating in
And
God's
he's back.
presence. Page 89, text 7. Meditate on the fact.
Meditate on the fact that the divine presence fills the entire universe and that God's infinite presence is with you constantly. This will allow you to be constantly joyful, realizing and believing with perfect faith that the divine presence is with you, protecting you. Realize that you're gazing at the divine, and that God is gazing at you. God can do as he pleases, and is the source of all of the goodness and suffering in the world. For his divinity and sustaining force is within each item of existence. Can you hear us? So, okay.
existence. So the Baal Shem Tov is someone that spent days and days in the forest, meditation. Many of the stories we have of the Baal Shem Tov, the stories of him deep in the woods, meditating. This is how he was, and he's sharing his experiences here, that meditation is a way to feel literally close to God. Once you meditated, you start living a different lifestyle. You start having a different expectation for life. There's an interesting story where Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Olav Shalom, who was close to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe held him at a higher standard than most people. And he came by the Rebbe for dollars, and he asks for a blessing. And the Rebbe asks him, "Did your wife come with you?" He lived in Yerushalayim in Israel. So he says, "No, I came alone." The Rebbe responds to him that a Jew is never alone. And he shared the story many, many, many times, because he was he authored many, many books. He translated the Talmud, translated the Tanya. Very smart person and a great author. But he laughs at himself, like, I'm an academic. But the Rebbe lived it. For the Rebbe, in an instant, the Rebbe said, but a Jew is never alone. No one is ever alone. No person is ever alone, because God is always with you. The Rebbe lived it. The Baal Shem Tov in this text here is trying to give that experience. When we meditate on this, we will begin living that we're not afraid of anything. We're not alone. God is always with us. Whatever happens is for the good. Whatever happens, happened because this is the way God wanted it to be. If I don't see today why it had to happen, hopefully tomorrow we'll get to know. And not always do we get to know the end of the story. Not always are we blessed to know why it had to happen. But knowing that it happened from God is sometimes a comforting thing for us to know. Let's continue in text 8 on page 90. Marilyn, you want to read for us from the Baal Shem Tov?
Okay. Number 9 or number 8?
Number 8.
Okay.
It's a
All right.
tremendous achievement.
Developing divine consciousness. It is a tremendous achievement to constantly meditate on the fact that we are close to God and that we are literally and entirely encompassed by His presence. We should try to remain connected to this reality to the extent that reflection becomes unnecessary, because we mentally envision God everywhere, constantly. At that point, we see that God is the place of the world. He pre-exists all of existence, and all of existence exists within God. This includes, of course, each of us as well. With this meditation, we fulfill the directive recorded in the Code of Jewish Law to set before us at all times.
Beautiful, thank you. And as you see on the screen, the figure of the glasses of this meditation shifts your mind and allowing you to see the world differently, even when you aren't thinking about it. Meditate enough, it becomes one with us, and that's our way of thinking becomes this godly way. I want to play for you a video of Rabbi Leibel Wolf, Professor Leibel Wolf, giving us a meditative idea based on exactly what we just learned. Again, if the sound doesn't carry over, you let me know. So we'll change the setting.
Design underlies every aspect of creation. It's quite amazing that as you note the
Rabbi,
world,
but he's not.
you find that everything possesses an element of design.
Something's wrong.
Doctors, scientists, artists all point to the fact that design creates for them the pattern of what their work is all about. Underlying design is a designer. Keep that in mind. Lift your flower and observe it. Have a good look at it. Look at the petals. See the thin veins, the pattern inscribed.
He's breaking
Beyond
up.
the petals,
Yeah.
look deep
I think-
within, and you might see the ovule.
I think the internet might be a little bit shaky. I'll try. Let me know.
Deeply embedded within, from which grows the stigma. Amazing.
Out of
Every
sync.
flower with the same
Same?
elements.
I think it's out of sync.
Gently close your eyes and bring to mind that flower that you have in your hand.
Definitely out
Become
of
aware of its exquisite color. A shade that's difficult to verbalize. And remember, every flower is subtly different, designed subtly differently. Raise the flower to your nose. What is its scent? Its perfume? If you were to find a word to describe that scent, what would it be? Touch one of the petals, press it lightly, feel its texture, soft. It may even be furry. Its unique texture. In your mind's eye, imagine a bee flying into the flower, looking for the pollen deep within, buzzing with satisfaction. Listen to that buzz. A flower is one of the most sensuous creations that God has made in the universe. You are that flower. You have a pattern, a unique pattern, a unique structure. You are a flower that God has created in His garden, in its garden, in her garden. Admire the you that possesses so many aspects of clear design. And design means purpose. You have been designed for your purpose. The world is a flower. The world possesses design. The world is purposeful. At all times, be aware, be mindful of the innate beauty and uniqueness of design in the world, in creation. And that way, relate to the designer and the purpose God has for you individually.
Okay, I'm sorry if the video wasn't clear or synced for all of you. You will get the link to the videos in the email later tonight or tomorrow. So you'll be able to listen to it again. But this is the first half of the class, which is the idea, reframing our vision and the way we see things. But at the end of the day, we still feel sometimes that we live in a world that has no purpose, that's filled with chaos. There are things all over the place. And the next few texts, we're going to bring out the ideas that when we truly understand how God manifests this world and how God recreates everything constantly, we'll come to a new conclusion where everything that's done actually has a specific purpose. As you see here on the screen, your soul is not only present in your actions, but it's the conscious actor. In other words, that's not just that you have a soul, so you're alive, but actually your soul is what's infusing every action that you do. And same as with the relationship between the divine presence in this world. Not that, oh, the world is here, so we have to have a God, we have to have electricity to give it energy. But rather, it's the energy that's infusing everything, and therefore it exists. So let's look at a very famous line that we have in our daily prayers. It comes from the Psalms. King David says that he covers the heavens with clouds, prepares rain for the earth, and causes mountains to sprout grass. He gives an animal its food, as well as the hungry young ravens that call out. In other words, every single detail in this world is taken care of by God specifically. Nothing is happening just at a random way. There's no such thing that in the wildlife things run differently. The same God that does everything for us orderly does it for them in a specific way. A leaf that grows on a tree, this leaf has already it was decided what this leaf is going to do. Is this leaf going to be used for tea for someone? Is it going to be for flowers at a wedding? Or is it going to be for some kids to play with in preschool? We don't know what Hashem had in mind, but we do know that whatever we end up doing with the leaf, this was already done. It was predetermined from before its conception. There's a joke. Nathan is a person who goes to work every morning and he catches the 7:35 train. One day he comes to the train station and he sees one of those electric scales. You put in $1 and it weighs you and it tells you how much you weigh. And he was marveled by this, and he takes out $1 while waiting for the train, and he jumps on the scale, and the scale responds to him and he says, "You're 185 pounds and you're Jewish." He looks back at the scale and says, "What? I don't believe it. How do you know I'm Jewish? 185 pounds, fine, but I'm Jewish." Takes out another $1 and he puts it in and he jumps on the scale, and the scale says, "You're 185 pounds and you're Jewish, and you take the 7:35 train to work and you work at the bank." He's like, "Wow, this is crazy. How does this scale know everything about me?" He decides he's got to test out this new technology. He runs into the bathroom and he mushes up his hair and he puts on a Band-Aid on his forehead and he takes his jacket off and he comes back to the scale and he jumps on the scale, puts in $1, and the scale announces back, "You're 185 pounds and you're Jewish, and you take the 7:35 train and you work at the bank, and you're a shlomazel because you just missed the 7:35 train." Talking about everything being predetermined already, you know? We can laugh about this, but to actually believe in these things is another level. But contemplating on this has a lot of value. So let's look at page 92. There's a question here. The question is, identify an occasion in which matters beyond your control unexpectedly and inexplicably shifted your plans or related the outcome you had intended for yourself. With hindsight, are you able to recognize the value in that change? Right, so we've all had these experiences where we've planned a trip and it didn't work out, or someone got sick and we couldn't travel. You can think of many scenarios, right? A snowstorm came and we couldn't go out of the house. Oftentimes, we don't stop and think back, oh, what happened? Oh, it's actually a miracle that I didn't end up catching that flight, or I didn't end up leaving town. I would have missed something else that I wasn't aware of at the time. But if we took a few moments to think back at some of these events, sometimes we can see the light. We can understand why we had to go through this whole situation just to have this experience. And if we're lucky enough, we get to see the why. We get to see why our plans had to change, and why we had to come into whatever the situation was. To see that is a true blessing. Not everyone is gifted to see the reason of why certain stuff happened to them. But as we start shifting our outlook in life, as we start meditating on these ideas, on these concepts, we will automatically start, and we will begin seeing this more and more often. More and more often, we'll start noticing that, oh, interesting, I couldn't make it to that meeting or to that outing, but it was so good I didn't go there, because it turns out that me being right here at this moment is much more important, right? Because we'll start seeing life from that perspective. And this also helps us with resilience. We start having positive experiences instead of negative experiences, right? When our expectations are not met, we feel very bad. We have a negative feeling. We kvetch and complain. But when we realize that this was God's plan the whole time, you laugh at yourself. In Yiddish, there's a saying, "A mensch tracht und Gott lacht." A man makes his plans and God laughs, because God already had a different plan for you. Whatever your plans are, it doesn't matter. We can plan from today to tomorrow. But whatever God wanted is what's going to end up happening, by hook or by crook. So recognizing that will allow us to accept it, and we will be much happier of a person because of that. There's a similar story where the Baal Shem Tov was once walking with one of his students, and they were on a deep path in the forests and the woods, and they were discussing Torah thoughts, and they didn't really bring food with them. They were, it was a spontaneous thing. And the student tells his teacher, "Master, I'm thirsty. I'm looking around for some water." And 10 minutes later, I'm really thirsty. Like 10 minutes after, he's like, "I got to go back. I'm going to faint. I need a drink. I can't handle this heat anymore." The Baal Shem Tov tells him, "Do you believe that everything comes from God, and that we are here in this spot and you're thirsty, and that this is all godly orchestrated?" "Of course I believe in all this." "Do you believe as well that God can bring you water?" "Of course I believe. God creates this whole world. God can bring me and you and everyone here in this moment and my thirst and everything. I believe that God can provide water as well." Moments later, they hear someone walking not far from them, and they see that he's carrying 2 pails of water on his shoulders, and they approach him and say, "Excuse me, sir, can I please have a drink of water?" He said, "Of course, have as much water as you'd like." And then the Baal Shem Tov asks this man, "And by the way, what are you doing? Why are you here? Walking in the forest, 2 buckets of water is a weird thing." So he says, "I'm actually doing this for a few days already. I lost my horse. My horse got lost somewhere in the woods here, and I'm looking and searching the woods for a few days with water so I can bring my horse some water." The Baal Shem Tov turned to a student and says to his student, "Look how much Hashem had to orchestrate for you to have your little drink of water. He had to make a few days ago this fellow to be here with his horse. He had to make his horse get lost. And the owner to go and get water and to be roaming the woods for this moment. For when you would say that your full trust is in God, that God can provide you water, the water will be there. Now, this is the Baal Shem Tov. We don't expect from ourselves to be the Baal Shem Tov. Like the famous saying, the famous saying comes from Reb Zusha of Anapoli. He was also a great sage in his own right. And he would say that when I die and I come up to heaven, they're not going to ask me, why weren't you Moses? Why weren't you King David? Why weren't you the Baal Shem Tov? Rather, they're going to ask me, why wasn't I Zusha? So we share these stories, not in the hope that that becomes me, but in the hope that we could become ourselves. Whoever your Zusha is, we have to know ourselves and our strengths and what we can hope, what our expectations could be for ourselves. We can't expect ourselves to be a Baal Shem Tov, but we could expect ourselves to reach our full potential. And for that, we have our meditative work and our studying and stuff that we can do to really get us to that level. Let's jump over to page 97 here, where Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the previous rabbi, continues here in a discourse to discuss how the concept of every single thing in this world has a purpose. In other words, until now, I think we were saying that everything God created it specifically. It was created on purpose, was created for something specific. Now, whoever wants to take this to the next level, not only was it created on purpose, but it was created for a specific purpose. And now our job is to figure out what the purpose is. And you see, we've done a great job throughout the years. I mean, we figured out how to mine gold and silver and copper and gas, technology, all these stuff. We figured out a lot of stuff, right? Now we want to figure out how we can realize how things are there for a purpose of a godly purpose, how we can bring a mitzvah to these objects. So let's do text number 11. Jonathan, you there? You have your book with you?
So
Yes.
Text 11, the Baal Shem Tov. This is going to be a longer one, so you'll make up for last one.
Let's see. The Baal Shem Tov taught that divine providence does not only mean that God orchestrates the individual movement of each of the manifold created entities, and that the same providence is actually determining the existence of and life of that entity. It also means that the particular involvement of a single entity bears a direct impact on the overall purpose of creation. Take, for example, the slightest quiver of a solitary sliver of a plant flourishing in the belly of the forest, or upon some tremendous mountain, or in one of our planet's deepest valleys that has never been traversed by a human. The plant's movements to the right, to the left, forward, or backward throughout the duration of its lifespan are actively determined by ongoing divine providence. God has issued a specific decree. This particular plant will live for a specific amount of months, days, and hours, and that during this time, it will turn and bend in these directions a certain amount of time. Beyond all that, however, each of these particular movements is significant for the overall purpose of creation. Through the combination and synthesis of all the myriad particular occurrences involving countless millions of species and subdivisions that exist within all the four kingdoms, the sublime divine intent that underpins all of creation is consummated. Not only is every feature of every entity divinely orchestrated, it plays an indispensable role in the divine purpose of creation. What is the purpose of creation?
Thank you. So what's the purpose? That's a good question. So the first idea is we have to recognize that there is a purpose. What is the purpose? Ultimately, the purpose is to bring Mashiach. That's the ultimate purpose. But why does a tree have to bend back and forth? I don't know if we know that answer. But But if you look at page 98, you have figure 3.2, right? Or in the screen, you can see a little bit here. Everyone's screen that you're looking at, you have 10,000 pixels that are creating a picture, right? You look at a digital screen, it's 10,000 tiny dots that when the dot has the right color and they're put close to each other, it creates an image. So you can see an image. Now, if to try to understand what the Rebbe is writing in this text is this idea. If every moment of your day is one little pixel, or every day of your life is one pixel, it has no meaning. Look at this green dot that's on the screen. It has no meaning. But if we add pixels to it, eventually it will create an entire story, right? So when he talks about how a tree or a flower is swaying back and forth, in the moment of one pixel, that has no meaning. It's not significant in any way. But when you get to see the whole story, how the whole universe operates, how everything serves God, how everything manifests itself with God, which I'm not even aware of what the full picture is. But we know that there is a full picture. There is a purpose for every single thing. So I think the first level is believing that everything is part of something much larger and something much greater. Once we know that, we can start seeing the world in that way. And we also have a certain faith that I'm not lucky enough to know what that is, right? I think maybe the Rebbe, every generation maybe has a giant or two that is aware of this type of stuff, but it's not really available for all of us. But when we see life from this view, we also recognize that I am very important. You are very important. Everything that you do is extremely significant. Every act you do, every interaction you have. And we start to realize that in not in an egotistical way, but in a purposeful way, we start to realize that I am a very important person for the global story. If my pixel is not on this canvas, then the picture is ruined, right? Before we were talking about someone who has a sensitive ear to music. What about someone who understands fine art? Someone who can understand how to see a picture. So we're one piece of that puzzle. When you look at one piece, it doesn't look like anything. It doesn't look like a story. It doesn't look like a nice piece of work. But once you see it all together, then you have the full vision. So we don't have that full vision, but we have the awareness that there is a full vision, right? Text number 12. I'll read text number 12, page 99. This is from Rabbi Tzodek HaKohen. Just as we are enjoined to believe in God, so must we subsequently believe in ourselves. In other words, we must believe that God has provided us with a mission in life, and our lives are not meaningless, but rather our souls come from God, the source of life, and God is delighted and satisfied when we execute his will. Right? This is based on this idea that we're saying that we feel it and we recognize it, and we actually have to go in and do it. Text number 13, Marilyn, we'll ask you to read it for us, please. This is taking the same idea to the next level, another source.
We should recognize and fully appreciate that our travels to various locations are not random. Each journey is specifically directed by God. The divine intention in orchestrating these journeys is that each individual has been allotted a specific portion of the material world to spiritually rectify. our portion are in specific locations to which we must journey. We acknowledge these acts of
Rectification.
rectification in a variety of ways, such as through studying Torah or praying in that location, or through eating, drinking, and sleeping there for the sake of properly serving God, or through another means of performing God's will in that place. The Baal Shem Tov associated this concept with the verse, God establishes the steps of man, meaning that a person's desire to relocate to a specific place is actually inspired by God for the purpose of that individual to engage in a particular aspect of divine service, thereby rectifying whatever this person has been appointed to rectify.
Beautiful. That's amazing. And this is from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, that this idea of hashgacha pratis, divine providence, that everything happens for a reason. That I met you because I can help you. I can teach you Torah. I can do the things that my strengths, the things that I'm good at. And you met me because I can benefit from you also. I can learn from you as well. And to realize that every interaction we have is there, not just that we can receive, but also that we can give, that we're there to help. We're there to rectify the situation. In more spiritual terms, when a cup of water comes my way and I make a blessing on it, because this water was waiting since the world was created, to come into my hands for me to make a blessing on that cup of water. And when I eat a piece of fish, it's because this fish was swimming in the water waiting for someone to make a blessing on it and enjoy it, and be healthy and strong, that you can be able to serve Hashem with that energy that you received from eating, from consuming that food. Realizing all of these things is a very, very big accomplishment. I think the more we meditate and the more we talk about this idea of hashgacha pratis, of divine providence, of recognizing that this divine spirituality exists and manifests itself in not only in the physical world, but it's active in the physical world, and we are there to elevate it. It will make our lives feel much more meaningful and much more purposeful. Like we mentioned before, also will help a lot with resilience. So there are definitely meditative concepts here, but I want to talk about things that we can take away from a class like tonight. So first of all, we have the concept, we are constantly in God's presence. So no matter what happened, if it was a good day, a bad day, an appointment got canceled, or I got a speeding ticket, whatever it is, we have to realize that our lives are not full of oives, but our life are filled with joyves. When we realize that our life is in God's hands, and every interaction, like we spoke about tonight, happens with God's intentions and happening, it's a positive experience. And that will bring us to just be a much happier person. Secondly, nothing happens for no reason. Even if it's something that's difficult, we know that once we come, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Where does that concept come from? Because we truly trust and believe that the outcome of this struggle is going to be a very good outcome. Otherwise, why did God have to do it to me? God is not looking to punish you or me or anybody. God is not looking to harm or make anyone's lives difficult. God wants to make our lives better, filled with more quality. But sometimes, if there's no pain, there's no gain. You got to go through the pain in order to get the gain. So when we accept the pain, we realize that we will one day overcome the struggle that we have, and life will be much better than it was previously. And lastly, every single thing that is in this world is part of creation. It has a purpose. And when we recognize that, we realize that not just things are there just randomly, but things are actually there for us. That's the idea of Hashgacha Pratis. That's there for this specific purpose. On page 102, there's an exercise here that we'll do. It says, which detail of the above meditations resonates with you most? It's question 1. And 2, how might you apply the meditation to your own life? For me, what sticks out the most is the flood that we had at Chabad. It was a devastating flood. I don't know why we had to go through it, but now we're, thank God, getting a new Chabad house, and I think that's like the light at the end of the tunnel. Again, I don't know why we have to go through the struggle. I don't know why we had to go through so much loss and 2 Torahs to get ruined. I don't know why that had to happen, but this is God's plan. In the beginning, it's very painful and the struggle is very real. But as you live through it, you get through it and you start to realize that I would have not gotten to the point where I am today if I haven't gone through that struggle. Sure.
I think that there's 2 things you got to remember, Rabbi. It's like taking your car, and getting lost. And God is taking you in a different direction. But it's also something else, like the Baal Shem Tov. If you're going into the forest,
right,
and you're trying to find your way back, you have to rely on something, which is faith and trust, which is actually one big thing, and that's where God comes in. And he was teaching you a lesson that you may not realize as yet, but he had to take you 2-3 years out and then try to make you realize it. If I'm not talking about you, I'm talking plural. If you don't realize it now, you're going to realize it maybe 3 weeks from now, maybe a month from now, maybe a year from now, but you're going to realize, oh, I should have listened to this person because, or that, or I should have done something different. That's and he's making you do. That's the reason you're going through what you're going through.
Right. Thank you, Michael. I want to hear from more people. I'm just first going to play the key points, and then whoever wants to sign off could, and we'll hear from whoever else wants to share.
Lesson 3. Mastermind. The benefits of divine closeness. 1. God is the soul of the world, and his presence animates all of existence. 2. Every detail of creation is deliberately designed by God and is formed by a unique expression of his presence in that being. 3. God is with us always, and we can feel his presence. 4. Nothing is by chance. Everything that happens is directed by God and is supposed to happen. 5. Everything that happens is an integral part of the master plan of creation. 6. Each one of us, in every circumstance of our lives, is relevant and important to the overall purpose of existence.
Okay.
So, Rabbi, you want to know what I miss? And I just thought